world comes back on, I'll go back and do some public speaking at conferences. And the one thing I want to actually broach is this subject to some level. As a leadership coach, going out and talking about what leadership needs to be today. If you're leading a corporation today, and this kind of goes back into the safe space stuff, you now have to understand kids. Sure, I have to stop using that word. Young men and women that just came out of college that have been in, because all of these people that were brought up with the ideology of harm, being ideological and emotional, it doesn't necessarily mean they're bad people. It's they see the world differently. They are now in our cultures. They are in our nonprofits, our NGOs, our corporate landscape, our body politic. And because of that, things are changing. If you look at HR today, it's very different than it was 5 years ago because of triggers, microaggressions, pronouns, right? Huge discussion between the left and the right. What does it mean? Why is it happening? And the same disconnect, the same level of venom is going back and forth on these fronts. And so my whole thing would be getting on the stage and saying something to the effect of, all right, how many of you in the audience fired your largest client last year because they wore a red hat? And you and I know they don't do that. We don't do that. So when your Democrat and Republican friends decided, hey, let's just not talk about that. We've been that way in the business world since I came up in the business world. And when I was in the agency world, I have numerous clients that were very conservative. And they would even make fun of me once in a while when we were out for dinner about a liberal tendency I had or whatever it would be. But it was a joke. It was a little jab. But we didn't talk about it. I didn't, we talked about our kids. We talked about our vacations. We talked about the campaigns we were running, whatever it may be, over a good bottle of vino and a perfectly cooked steak. And we were there. The business world, maybe for the first time in the world, could lead this charge because
I know
business people don't have these same, cantankerous fights. And then, fuck you, I'm firing you, because online you can be like, yeah, I'm blocking you, I'm unfriending you, you're an idiot. You don't do that in the business world. You don't say, as an agency guy, I wasn't going to fire my largest client because they voted for George Bush.
Right.
It would be like, well, now I have to lay off 12 people because I am the arbiter of morals. I am smarter than everyone else. Like, no, you're not.
And there's a sense in which, the op-ed writer Tom Friedman actually saw this coming years ago when he had a vivid image that it ends up, of course, is not literally true, but it was a nice metaphor. He said, countries that have McDonald's don't fight each other. And he was making the point that if your country is advanced enough to have normal businesses like fast food restaurants, you're going to really hesitate before attacking or responding to a country with in a military way who is also like that, because you'd rather do business with each other, right? It's your point that you're making. Friedman, with his, he's had a couple books where I can't remember which book it was. He floated that idea. It was like 20 years ago. And it's this whole idea that business has come to play a role globally that was never envisioned for it. Adam Smith didn't sit around and saying, what can we do to replace governments? Oh, okay, let's do this. No, that wasn't the idea at all. But here we have hierarchical structures with great span and great power involving, lots of people, which in all of human history before us, we didn't have organizations like that. The only thing we had was a sovereign state, a nation, or, at a certain point, the Catholic Church had a certain span and structure, organizational structure and all that. But we're not accustomed to having, multinational, global corporations and stuff. And how that changes the way people live together. You're right. It can be. Everybody's quick to point out what a nefarious influence business has in the world. Business is responsible for global crisis. It's responsible for corruption and greed in other countries. It's responsible. Wait a minute. My double power principle, anything with power for good has equal and opposite power for ill. If you're just going to point out the harms that business is responsible for, okay, let's go back and look at the comparable goods. And let's be the people who manage it in such a way as to reduce and eliminate those harms and beef up those goods, right? So that's exactly what you're saying, Joey. If we use business in the right way now, perhaps we can heal the political harms that if we only had politics and didn't have the kind of business context that we have. And look, business in 1850, business in 1920 was real different in America for what it is now. Right. So in the 30s and 40s, your local business people, half of them could be in the Klan, you know.
Right. Right.
But right now, business has such a scope, has and even local business has a sensitivity because it's connected with bigger business in ways that we in our generation are being challenged to think through how to use this well as a way to heal the human condition rather than as a way to make it worse. So you're absolutely right to draw people's attention to that.
Well, because go ahead.
Go ahead. I was going to say my friend Alan Murray, who's editor-in-chief and CEO of Fortune magazine, he's got this great podcast called Leadership Next, in which he brings on CEOs who are trying to use their position in a really, it's like the anti-Gilgameshes of the world, trying to use their positions in socially positive ways. And they don't see that as distracting them from their business, but they see that as immensely enriching their business and the power of bringing people together for positive things that will have bottom line very positive results rather than taking the eye off the ball, as Milton Friedman might have said long ago that they were doing, right? So
it goes back to running your emotions again. Yeah, that's the idea for me, is that if we can control our emotions with clients.
Yeah.
And why is that? I mean, obviously it's a fiduciary thing, right? There's money involved. So we can do that. So maybe if you treat everyone online like they're your biggest client,
right?
As maybe the baby picture, if that doesn't work for you, treat them as your biggest client, because no one treats their biggest client with disrespect.
You're onto something there, Joey. You're onto something, and you're plugging into a great moral tradition. The great moral philosophers have always recommended various mental tricks to play on yourself.
Yeah.
Like, what would Jesus do? What would my mother think of this decision? What would my mentor say if he saw me doing this? How will I look at myself in the mirror tomorrow morning? Yeah. They've given you all kinds of little mind games to play to govern your conduct. And what you're saying is treat this person as if they were your most important client. Okay, how would I deal with this situation right now?
Or a baby.
Right? Or the baby. These are two alternatives that both could work, right? And what you're doing is it's like the Iliad and the Odyssey. You're taking people back to something that matters beyond their own ego. And so if you can bring people face to face with something they care about more than whether they are the winner of this discussion.
Right.
If they care about something more, it can even be just their bottom line, right? Yeah. But it's something more than whether I win this argument. If you can remind them they care about something more than that, then that governs conduct, that moderates behavior, and that's important.
I agree. And I think that's a piece